Nobody looks heroic when they're hungry. Elias Thorne had carried that thought through 2 wars, a ruined knee, and 14 years of kneading dough before dawn in a town that smelled of wet ash and stale grudges. The evidence walked through his door every morning. Miners with stone dust in their lungs, farm hands whose salted fields still refused to grow, widows who counted copper pieces the way priests counted sins. But the figure standing outside his bakery window that evening was none of those. Millhaven sat in the crook of a dead river valley, pinched between the Thornwall Mountains and the Ashen Corridor. 3 farming villages turned to charcoal during the 10th reclamation. The war had ended 11 months ago. Treaties signed, armies broken apart, the orc clans shoved behind the Grey March line into territories too barren to feed them. Towns like Millhaven were left to rebuild with splintered hands and memories that refused to cool. The rain had been falling since noon, not the honest, heavy kind that washed things clean, but a low autumn drizzle that clung to everything. Cobblestones, shutters, the hem of Elias's flour-dusted apron as he stepped toward the window to latch the shutters for the night. The bakery still held warmth from the brick oven at the back wall, and the smell of rye and rosemary hung in the air thick enough to taste. 3 unsold loaves sat cooling on the iron rack behind the counter. A kettle of potato and leek soup simmered low near the coals. He was reaching for the latch when movement stopped his hand. A shape beneath the market post across the street, half hidden by the tanner's awning. At first he thought it was one of the Harlow boys. Then the shape stepped into the gray light. She wasn't human. The skin was green. Not bright storybook green, but a deep, weathered olive dulled by exhaustion and cold. Her cheekbones pressed sharp against the skin, the kind of lean that meant weeks of hunger. One eye carried the fading yellow-purple of an old bruise. Her lower tusks, one cracked halfway down, jutted from a jaw held tight enough to tremble. She was tall, broad-shouldered in a way that should have been imposing, but the bones of her collarbone showed through torn leather armor, military cut. The stitching pattern along the shoulder guard marked Field Medic Corps. She stood in the rain, staring through his window, with an expression Elias recognized immediately. Not desperation. Worse. Arithmetic. The quiet calculation of someone deciding whether their dignity weighed more than their survival. She turned away twice. Both times she came back to the same spot, staring at the warm glow leaking through his window like it was something she'd lost the right to want. The third time, she walked straight to the door. The iron bell gave a single dull clang. Warm air wrapped around her and her shoulders buckled, the way a body betrays you when sudden heat meets prolonged cold. Water ran from cracked bracers onto the stone floor. Neither of them spoke. The girl, up close, she looked young, early 20s by human reckoning, stood just inside the doorway with her hands clenched, dripping, jaw locked so tight the muscles of her neck stood taut as rope. "Kitchen's closing," Elias said. His voice came out gentler than he intended. "But I've still got bread left." Her eyes, pale amber, nearly gold, dulled flat with exhaustion, swept the room once. Exits first. The back door behind the oven, the window, the gap between the flour shelves and the wall. Soldiers did that, mapping escape routes before committing to conversation. Then she reached into her armor, slow and deliberate, and placed something on the counter. The metal was roughly the size of a walnut, carved from bone and tooth. Real tooth, or canine yellowed and smooth from years of handling. A strip of cured leather threaded through a hole at the top. Along one face, crude but precise symbols had been etched. Clan marks, military insignia, a medic's spiral, a clan honor mark. For an orc, this was not jewelry. This was identity. "It is real bone," she said. Her voice came out low, the common tongue sitting awkwardly on a mouth built for a different language. Clan, tooth, and war chief marrow, worth more than silver to those who understand. Enough for one loaf. He picked it up. She flinched, barely, and locked herself still. He turned it slowly in his flour-dusted fingers. Ancient, polished smooth by generations, the etchings deep, confident. He set it down gently, pushed it toward her. "If nobody who deserved this has taken it from you yet," Elias said quietly, "then I'm not going to be the one who does." Confusion first, then something rawer, the disorientation of someone braced for a transaction, who who received something they hadn't budgeted for. "I can pay," she said. "I heard you." He turned away and pulled the warmest loaf from the rack. Dark rye, the crust still faintly crackling. Then soup, ladled into a clay bowl, steam curling upward. He set both in front of her. "Sit down before your knees give out." On the stool, not the floor, she sat, carefully, as though the stool might be revoked, and picked up the bread. She tore it apart with both hands and ate like an animal, crammed pieces into her mouth, barely chewing, shoulders hunched forward over the bowl the way a starving dog guards food from threats that might not even exist. Soup ran down her chin, crumbs scattered across the counter. Her breath came in short, ragged pulls between bites, and for a few seconds the only sounds in the bakery were tearing bread and desperate swallowing. Then she stopped. Her hands froze mid-tear. Her eyes went to Elias, who was leaning against the flower shelf watching her with an expression she couldn't parse. Slowly, color darkened across the green of her cheeks. Shame, or something close enough. "Fast eating is a compliment to the baker," Elias said evenly. "Means I didn't oversalt the crust." She went back to eating, slower but not by much. When both were finished, she sat with her hands around the empty bowl, staring into it as though the warmth itself needed to be memorized before it disappeared. "How many days?" Elias asked. "3? Water? Until yesterday. What happened yesterday?" "Patrol found the camp. Burned what was left." He tore another slice from the remaining loaf and slid it across, without comment. What happened next, he did not expect. She reached to her belt, slowly, deliberately non-threatening, and drew a small bone-handled knife. She pressed the blade across her left palm. Dark blood welled immediately, thick and almost black in the firelight. She pressed her bleeding hand flat on the countertop. "I owe you a debt. Blood marked. Bone witnessed. You fed me when no law required it." Elias stared at the blood spreading slowly across his clean counter, then at the absolute seriousness in those amber eyes, the rigid set of her shoulders, the bleeding hand held steady as stone. "You know God well when it is key. Today, that meditation may be all. You can't be a false, finding part of the Southern California where you have can held. Today, your father will not help." He reached under the counter and produced a clean rag. "No blood in my bakery. You want to pay me back, you can wash the dishes." She blinked. "There are 9 days of dishes," he added. "I've been busy." Something happened to her face. Small, barely visible. Not a smile. The faintest crack in the architecture of someone holding themselves together through sheer structural will. She took the rag, wrapped her hand. "I will clean that as well," she said. "Damn right you will." She cleaned everything. Dishes, prep table, flour bins, bread racks, without being asked, and with a thoroughness that bordered on surgical. Medic's hands. "You have a name?" Elias asked, setting a cup of chamomile on the counter. "Gorka. Gorka of Clan Grothmar. Field medic. 7th Assault Corps Healing Division." The titles came out like they still meant something. "I'm Elias. Baker. Bad knee. Worse temperament." He pushed the tea closer. "Drink that." The tea was already made, and I don't like chamomile. She drank without speaking. The silence between them had stopped being hostile. Two people too tired to perform more than coexistence. "You were military," she said eventually. "Not a question. What gave it away? You check exits when you enter a room. You keep your knife hand free near strangers, and your left knee catches every third step. Field injury, not farming accident. The bone healed wrong. How long were you watching me? Long enough to know you reached for the window latch. Not a weapon. Civilians close windows, soldiers close doors. You have been civilian for a while. It ached in cold weather. Always had since Kessler Ridge, since the orc warhammer that shattered the bone, and the field medic who'd pulled him from the rubble. Storm's getting worse. Storage room behind the oven. Floor's stone, but it's warm. Orcs do not sleep on soft things, and you'll sleep on whatever keeps you from freezing, because I'm not explaining a frozen orc to the morning customers. She cleaned her teacup and the empty bowl, carried them to the wash basin, and set them upside down on the drying rack. Only until morning. Sure. He found the blanket, old military issue, still smelling faintly of campfire smoke. She laid it on the stone floor, positioning herself with her back against the wall and a clear sightline to the door. Her knife went beside her right hand. The knife stays sheathed, Elias said. Orc warriors sleep armed. This isn't a battlefield. The most dangerous thing in this room is my cinnamon rolls. Slowly, like a concession that cost something real, she moved the knife to the other side, still within reach. No longer at her hand. Try to sleep. Morning comes early in a bakery. He woke to screaming, not gradual stirring, but a raw, guttural howl ripping through stone walls. Orc language, words he couldn't understand but tones he recognized. Fear, grief, someone reliving something that couldn't be stopped. Elias was down the stairs before his knee registered the cold. The storage room door was half open. Firelight threw orange shadows across the walls. Gorka was on her feet, pressed into the corner, knife in hand. Her eyes were open but not seeing, locked onto something that existed only inside her own skull. Sweat tracked down her face. Gorka. No response. Gorka. He stepped forward. Her hand closed around his throat before his next heartbeat. The grip was iron, orc muscle driven by nightmare reflex, fingers locked around his windpipe. His feet left the floor. He didn't fight it. He put his hand, gently, against her forearm. 2 seconds. 3. The amber eyes focused, registered his face. Not an enemy, not a memory, but a man with flour under his fingernails, and no intention of fighting back. She released him like his skin had caught fire. Elias dropped, coughed, twice. Gorka backed into the wall, shaking, the knife clattering to the floor. I could have killed you. You didn't. Nightmare? She didn't answer for a long time. I see my mother being killed. Every night. The same moment she looks at me, she tells me to run. And the blade, she pressed her fists against her thighs. I cannot make it stop. I dream about the war too. Every night. Same hill, same fire. 14 years. And it hasn't faded once. So I get up at 3 in the morning and make bread instead. Doesn't fix anything. But it fills the hours between the nightmare and the sunrise. She looked at him with something stripped bare. Recognition. The wordless understanding between two people who know what it means to be afraid of sleeping. Come make bread, he said. Dough doesn't knead itself. He walked into the kitchen without checking if she followed. After a moment, bare feet on cold stone, hesitant at first, then steadier, she appeared in the doorway with the blanket around her shoulders and dried tear tracks she probably didn't know were visible, cutting pale lines through the dust on her cheeks. He didn't mention the tears. He handed her a lump of dough and pointed to the work table. Knead until it stops sticking. Don't punch it. Her hands were absurdly strong. Orc muscle, compressing the dough with a force that should have destroyed it. But she figured out the rhythm within 30 seconds. Adjusted pressure. Found the motion. You are staring, she said. You're good at this. I am good at everything that involves hitting things repeatedly. He snorted. The sound surprised both of them. They worked side by side while rain hammered the shutters. Neither spoke about the nightmare. Some things communicated better through shared silence and the smell of rising dough than through words. By gray dawn, 32 loaves sat rising on the prep table. It smells like my mother's field kitchen, Gorka said quietly. The words escaped before she could catch them. She went rigid, saying something true where truth felt dangerous. Your mother baked? She made camp bread for the wounded. After surgeries, she said bread was the first thing a body remembers how to want after pain. Smart woman, Elias said. Gorka nodded once. Then she went back to kneading, and the conversation folded itself closed like something that would open again later, when the walls were lower and the morning was further from the night. If this story touched something in you, something real, something quiet, consider subscribing. Every chapter is free. But those who join the membership help keep the fire lit. And if a moment earned it, a super thanks is the warmest way to say the bread was worth the wait. The first customers arrived with the dawn bell. Millhaven's morning trade was a creature of routine. The same faces in roughly the same order, governed by shift schedules at the ironworks and the grain mill. Hamish Crew, foreman at the eastern shaft, always came first. 2 rye rolls, black coffee, no conversation. After him, the Pelham sisters, who ran the candle shop on Brewer's Row and had never once ordered the same thing twice in 14 years. Then the miners, then the mill hands, then the widows, then whoever else the morning dragged in. Elias moved behind the counter with the practiced economy of a heartbeat. He'd stopped noticing. Gorka stayed near the back. He'd given her a spare apron, too short, human-sized, the strings barely reaching around her frame, and positioned her at the prep station behind the partition. She moved through the tasks without instruction, reading the kitchen the way a medic reads a triage tent, identifying what needed doing, prioritizing, executing. The flour bags that took Elias 2 hands to lift, she shouldered one-armed. The dough she'd kneaded before dawn had risen perfectly, the orc's strength producing a compression that created air pockets he couldn't replicate. By mid-morning, she had reorganized the spice shelf, restacked the grain stores by weight, and cleaned the inside of the bread oven with a thoroughness that suggested she found the existing state personally offensive. "You rearranged my entire kitchen," Elias said during a lull. "Your kitchen was arranged by someone who does not understand spatial efficiency. I've been baking here for 14 years, and it has been wrong for 14 years. He stared at her. She stared back. The amber eyes held no apology whatsoever. The trouble arrived with the lunch crowd. Millhaven's midday trade brought the heavier workers, smiths with soot-black hands and shoulders like bridge pylons, quarrymen who ate standing up, because sitting down meant they might not get back up. These were people who measured the world in what they could lift, what they could endure, and what they could afford to ignore. The first to notice was Aldrich Voss. Voss was a farrier, 63, built like leftover masonry, with a burn scar across his right cheek from shoeing war horses during the siege of Drenmark. He'd lost a brother in the war. He dealt with grief the way the lower trades dealt with grief. He didn't. He was halfway through his second bowl of soup when Gorka stepped out from behind the partition carrying fresh loaves. The silence that followed was immediate, total, the kind that has weight. Every head turned. Gorka set the tray down. Her movements didn't change, but Elias saw the shift in her shoulders, the almost imperceptible tightening along her spine. She knew a person didn't survive as a refugee without developing the ability to feel a room change temperature. Voss set his spoon down. "Didn't know you'd hired a greenskin, Thorne." The word landed like a stone in still water. Conversational. Which made it worse. Elias wrapped a loaf without looking up. "Didn't know my staffing decisions required approval from a man who can't shoe a mule without swearing for 20 minutes. Nervous chuckles along the bench. Voss didn't smile. "She from the border camps? She's from the back of my kitchen, where she's been making bread that's better than anything I've turned out in a decade, which makes her more useful in this building than anyone else present, myself included." The conversations resumed slowly, but the glances continued. Gorka was always watching. After the crowd thinned, she stood at the wash basin cleaning bowls with mechanical precision, the body doing something repetitive so the mind could process something it wasn't ready to name. "You didn't have to do that," she said without turning. "Defend me." "I didn't defend you. I insulted Voss's farrier skills. Completely different. It is not always like that, the defending. I know. In the last town, they threw stones. Not at first. First they let me sleep in the stable. Then someone's goat died, and they needed something to blame." She rinsed a bowl. "Stones. In the town before that, a family hired me to chop firewood. 3 days, when I came for payment, the husband said orcs did not deserve pay because orcs had destroyed his cousin's farm." She rinsed another bowl. "I have never been to the southern reach." She finished the dishes, turned around. "I am not asking for pity." "Good. I don't stock pity. Bread? Yes. Pity costs extra." The smallest movement at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile, the place where a smile would go if she ever built one from scratch. That evening, after the last customer left and the shutters were latched, Gorka set the broom against the wall and stood still for a moment, her back to Elias. The oven fire burned low. Candles flickered in the draft from the chimney. I was not only exiled by humans, she said. Elias looked up from the bread paddle he was repairing. My clan cast me out, after the war, when the survivors returned to the camps behind the gray mark. Why? She turned around. Slowly she pulled the collar of her shirt aside to expose her left shoulder. The scar was enormous. Not a wound, an erasure. Where clan markings should have been, the tattoos and ritual scarification every orc carried from their naming ceremony, there was only a ragged field of scar tissue. Cut away, deliberately, the skin still puckered at the edges, the flesh remembering violence it could not forget. They removed my clan marks, Gorka said, knife and fire, in front of the entire camp, the punishment for treason. What treason? I healed humans. The words sat in the air between them, simple as stones, heavy as the mountain that held Millhaven in its shadow. As water, crying and drowning, becomes more sun, meeting, and everything, then the sun reaches out. That is the arrow found the gap between heaven and its shadow. During the siege of Bastion Ford, my unit overran a civilian field hospital. 30 wounded, women, children, elderly. My commander ordered termination. No survivors. I treated the wounded instead. Human and orc. 14 survived. She looked at the floor. The clan tribunal found me guilty of treason against blood. Exile, permanent. And the brand means I belong to no one, no clan, no name, no ancestors. For an orc, this is worse than death. When I die, there is no one to sing for me. My spirit goes nowhere. Your mother, Elias said carefully, was the one who taught me. Gorka's voice dropped. She was Baraka, chief healer of Clan Grothmar. During the final battle at Bastion Ford, when War Chief Dren ordered the execution of human prisoners, my mother refused. Her hands clenched at her sides. Dren killed her himself in front of the entire regiment, as an example. She looked at me before the blade fell. She told me to run, and Her voice cracked, a hairline fracture through the controlled surface. I ran. The bakery seemed to contract around them, the walls closer, the firelight smaller. Wind pressed against the shutters, and somewhere distant a nightbird called once and received no answer. Elias set down the paddle. He didn't speak. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't reach for words that would have been too small for the space they needed to fill. He waited. The medal was hers. She gave it to me on the morning of the last battle. She knew she was not coming back. She knew what she was going to do. Yes, that's not treason, Gorka. That's the opposite of treason. She looked at him, sharp, sudden, the amber eyes bright and terrible. Tell that to my clan. Tell that to the humans who see green skin and think monster. I'm telling you. Gorka turned away. Her shoulders rose and fell once, a single controlled breath that took everything she had. Elias picked up the paddle and went back to sanding the crack. Sometimes the kindest thing one person could do for another was to let grief breathe without forcing it into a cage of words. It happened the next morning before the dawn bell. Elias was carrying flour when his knee buckled on the threshold step. He caught himself on the doorframe, teeth clenched against the bright spike of pain. Gorka was beside him before he finished cursing. "Sit," she said. He sat. The pain made standing a negotiation he was losing. She knelt beside him. Her hands moved to his knee, pressing gently along the joint. The scar tissue, warm, certain, mapping the damage the way they'd mapped 1,000 wounds before. Orc weapon, she said. War hammer, Kesser Ridge. The bone was shattered and reset incorrectly. You have been in pain every day since. 14 years. The field surgeon who treated this was either very brave or very incompetent. She was both. Slowly, she looked up. Her eyes traveled from his knee to the scar along his calf, visible where the trouser leg had ridden up. Then to his hands, his face. "This wound," she said. The surgeon. What did she look like? Something sealed for 17 years shifted in his chest. Green skin, dark green, strong hands. She had green eyes, not gold like yours, forest green, and she wouldn't stop yelling at me. Gorka was very still. I was bleeding all over her equipment, 3 walls coming down, and this orc medic grabbed me by the collar and told me if I died on her table, she would find my ghost and make it apologize. Gorka's breath caught, a small, involuntary sound. I never learned her name, Elias said. By the time I woke up, she was gone. Her name, Gorka whispered, was Saravane. The bakery went silent. Not the silence of 2 people pausing in conversation, but the silence of something locking into place. A gear finding its tooth, a bone finding its socket. A pattern completing itself across 17 years, and 2 lives that should never have intersected again. She had green eyes because she was half Northern clan, Gorka said, her voice barely audible. The green eyes skipped me. I got my father's coloring. She looked down at her hands on his knee, the same hands that had inherited her mother's gift for healing. She told me about you, the stubborn human who kept apologizing for bleeding on her equipment. She said you were the reason she believed humans were worth saving. Elias couldn't speak. His throat had closed around something that felt too large for the room they were sitting in. She told me that story every year on the anniversary of Kessel Ridge. She said that if one human could be worth saving, then the line between enemy and patient was a lie. That it had always been a lie. That's why she refused Dren's order. Yes, because of me, because of what you taught her without knowing it. Then Gorka placed both hands flat against his ruined knee and closed her eyes. Warmth spread through the joint. Deep, slow, spreading through bone and scar tissue like sunlight moving through cold water. The pain didn't vanish, but it quieted, settled, like something angry being told gently that it was allowed to rest. Orc healing, the old practice, the one human scholars called superstition, and orc shamans called remembering, the body's own knowledge, guided by hands that understood how to listen to damaged things. When she lifted her hands, the ache had retreated to a dull background hum, still present, still permanent, but no longer shouting. He looked at her. She looked at the floor. The fire crackled softly between them, and dawn light began to press against the shutters, pale, thin, uncertain of its welcome. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Dawn broke gray, and with it came the sound Elias would remember for the rest of his life. He was stacking loaves when he heard it, low, resonant, from behind the partition. Not a song exactly, a sequence of sounds from deep in the chest, each note held until it bled into the next like water over stone. An orc lament, the death song, the one sung for the lost. Elias had heard orc war cries on battlefields, brutal, percussive, designed to terrify. This was nothing like that. This was the other side, the quiet side, the sound an entire culture made when it needed to acknowledge that someone was gone, and the world was smaller for it. The notes filled the bakery, slowly wrapping around the flour bins and the stone walls like smoke from a fire that burned without consuming. Gorka's eyes were closed. Her hands continued shaping dough, mechanical, automatic, while her voice carried something with no human translation. Not grief exactly, not prayer. Something between the two. A conversation with absence. Across the street, the tanner's wife stopped hanging laundry to stare. A carter slowed his mule. 2 children pressed their faces against the glass. Nobody interrupted. When the song ended, the silence it left behind was heavier, but cleaner, the way air feels after a storm. Now she knows, Gorka said quietly. Knows what? Then he turned back to the bread display and adjusted a loaf that didn't need adjusting. Every week this story grows. If you want to walk beside Gorka and Elias through what comes next, subscribe and join the journey. Members get early chapters, and if this moment landed, a super thanks tells the algorithm this story deserves to be found. 4 days passed. The bakery absorbed Gorka the way soil absorbs rain. Slowly, silently, without announcement. She woke before Elias every morning. By the time he dragged his bad knee down the stairs, at 3:30, she had already lit the oven, measured the flour, and begun the first knead. Her loaves were denser than his, chewier with a dark crust that cracked when you tore it. Different from what Millhaven was used to. Not worse. She could carry 2 50-pound flour sacks at once without adjusting her breathing. She kneaded dough with a force that should have destroyed it, but instead produced a gluten structure so tight the bread practically bounced. She cleaned the oven by crawling halfway inside while it was still warm enough to singe human skin, orc hide being thicker, built for environments that would hospitalize the average farmhand. "You're going to kill yourself in that oven," Elias said one morning, watching her emerge headfirst with soot across her face and a look of grim satisfaction. "The carbon buildup was reducing your heat efficiency by at least 15%. I didn't know ovens had heat efficiency. You simply choose not to think about it. My lifestyle is why the bread tastes like bread instead of an engineering report." But Elias caught the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth before she disappeared back inside. The child came on the 5th day, mid-morning. The bakery was half full. Miners coming off the night shift, the Pelham sisters debating rosemary versus thyme in a voice loud enough to qualify as a civic event. The door opened. A woman stepped inside, holding a boy by the hand. The child was perhaps 4 years old, copper hair, missing a front tooth. He saw Gorka first. The boy's face went through a sequence of expressions so rapid they almost blurred. Curiosity, confusion, and then, with the absolute conviction that only small children can achieve, pure terror. The scream was enormous, disproportionate to the body producing it, a sound that bounced off the bakery walls and froze every conversation. The mother snatched the boy up and was through the door before the echo died, muttering apologies she didn't mean. The bell clanged. Cold air swept in. Then, silence. Gorka stood behind the partition with a loaf in both hands, completely still. Her face showed nothing. The amber eyes were fixed on the door the child had vanished through, and her expression was so carefully, so precisely empty, that Elias recognized it immediately. The face of someone who has just been told, by a 4-year-old who doesn't know better, exactly what they are. Nobody spoke. The miners studied their soup. The Pelham sisters found something fascinating about the ceiling beams. The silence became its own kind of violence, the particular cruelty of a room full of people pretending they hadn't witnessed something everybody saw. "Next person who orders soup gets extra bread," Elias said. "I overbaked this morning, and I need the counter space." Conversations resumed. Gorka set the loaf on the rack and went back to the prep table. Her movements were controlled, measured, precise. But if you listened carefully, the sound her fists made against the table was not kneading. It was hitting. Elias heard it. He didn't go to her. He gave her the one thing she needed more than comfort, the space to feel it without an audience. That night, the sound came just before midnight. Crying, not jagged, quiet, controlled, the sound of someone trying to grieve without making it audible. Elias walked to the storage room door, stood there 2 seconds, then turned back. Some things required presence, others required absence. When the sound stopped, he put the kettle on. Gorka appeared with dry eyes and a jaw set like iron. He poured tea without speaking. She drank it the same way. Neither mentioned it. The window was the first thing. The words were the second. Elias found them at dawn on the 6th morning. The front window shattered inward, glass scattered across the counter and the bread racks. On the outside wall, painted in tar pitch that had dripped in the rain, 2 words, "Orc Lover." He stood in the doorway, calculating not the cost of the glass, but the cost of what would come after. Gorka appeared behind him, looked at the window, at the words. "I will leave," she said. "No, this is because of me. This is because 3 drunk idiots with tar pitch ran out of better ideas at 2 in the morning. The window was already cracked. They did me a favor. Elias, the answer is no. Help me clean this up. And throw out that bread. Glass and rye is bad for repeat business." Scrubbed the words off the wall together. Gorka's hands stronger, Elias's more patient. By the time the first customer arrived, a board covered the window. If anyone noticed the faint tar shadow, nobody mentioned it. The marketplace incident happened 3 days later. Market day, cramped, noisy, crowded with vendors and the general population spending money they didn't have. Elias had sent Gorka for salt and yeast because keeping her behind the partition forever was not a life but a smaller cage. She made it to the salt merchant's stall before the staring started. The usual mechanics, lingering eyes, whispered conversations, the subtle repositioning of bodies creating distance. She was halfway across the square when screaming started. Not fear, pain. A child's voice. Near the blacksmith's cart, a boy, 7, maybe 8, was on the ground clutching his arm. Blood ran between his fingers. The apprentice stood horrified. An accident, a glancing blow. People gathered, the instinctive crowd that forms around emergencies, full of concern and completely useless. Someone shouted for the healer. Gorka was moving before any of them finished talking. She crossed the square in 5 strides, dropped to her knees, caught the injured arm. The crowd scattered backward. A collective flinch. Someone shouted. Someone grabbed a child and pulled them away. Gorka ignored all of it. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who had spent years in field hospitals, where hesitation meant death. She examined the wound. Deep laceration. Bone visible, bleeding heavily but no arterial damage. Found the pressure points without searching. Tore a strip from her own shirt, wrapped the wound, applied compression with one hand while stabilizing the boy's arm with the other. The boy stared up at her, too shocked to be afraid. "Breathe," Gorka said. "Steady, low, calm, slowly. Through your nose, like you are smelling bread." The boy breathed. The crying quieted to hiccups. The blood stopped spreading. The mother arrived, face white, hands shaking. For one terrible second, the crowd held its breath. The mother dropped to her knees beside the orc. "Is he?" "The cut is deep, but clean. No bone damage. He needs stitches. Keep pressure here." She guided the mother's hand to the compression point. "The healer can close it properly." The mother stared at the green hands holding her son's arm, at the bandage torn from the orc's own clothing. "Thank you," she said. 2 words, barely audible, but they landed with a weight that rearranged everything around them. Gorka nodded once, released the arm, stood, walked back to the yeast cellar with the entire square watching, bought the yeast, walked home. She didn't mention it to Elias. He heard anyway. In Millhaven, you always did. The guards came on a Thursday. 2 of them wearing Lord Heron's garrison leather, the local authority that governed from a stone keep on the hill, with the benevolent indifference of a man who found his hunting dogs more interesting than his lower holdings. Gorka of Clan Grothmar, not a question. Gorka set down the bread paddle. Her face went still, the practiced stillness of someone who had heard that tone before. The younger guard produced a scroll, wax seal. By order of Lord Heron, all orc-born individuals within township boundaries are to be remanded to the Grey March resettlement camps, effective immediately. 3 customers at the counter, Voss near the window, the Pelham sisters at their table. Gorka untied her apron, folded it, set it on the counter with the careful movements of someone who had practiced losing things, until the motion no longer required thought. Each fold precise, the ritual of a person preparing to be erased from another place that had almost become a home. "I will go with you," she said. Elias stepped out from behind the counter. His knee caught on the step. It always did. And he limped forward until he stood between Gorka and the guards. "She's my employee. She works here, she sleeps here. She's committed no crime. Sir, the order applies to all orc-born." I heard the order. "I'm asking what she's done. This isn't personal, Mr. Thorne. It's personal to her." His hand caught the leather cord of Gorka's medal, resting near the register, and dragged it off the counter. It hit the floor with a sound like a knuckle cracking. He picked it up between 2 fingers, the way someone holds a dead insect. "What's this? Animal bone?" The air changed, not gradually, instantaneously, the way air changes when lightning is about to strike. Gorka's lips pulled back from her tusks, both of them, bared in a way Elias recognized from battlefields as the precursor to violence so fast the human nervous system couldn't process it. She moved, The guard hit the wall before Elias registered she'd crossed the room, one hand around his throat, the other pinning his weapon arm. The stone cracked behind his shoulder blades. "That," Gorka said very quietly, from 2 inches away, "is my mother." Nobody breathed. Her arm trembled, not effort, restraint. Every muscle locked, holding back something that wanted to close the fist and end the conversation permanently. Her eyes were flat gold. "Gorka," Elias said. She didn't look at him. "Gorka, let him go. Your mother told you not to kill humans. She made you promise." The trembling intensified. Then, slowly, degree by degree, her fingers opened. The guard dropped, gasping. His partner drew his sword halfway, caught between duty and the understanding that the orc had chosen not to kill and could unchoose at any time. Gorka stepped back, shaking the aftermath of something enormous being caged by something barely strong enough to hold it. "She made me promise," she whispered, "but you are making it very difficult." The elder guard straightened his collar. "The order stands." "No," the voice came from behind. "She doesn't." Everyone turned. Voss stood up, the old farrier, burn scar and all. "She saved my nephew." Market day, the boy with the arm. "That was my brother's kid. I'll stand as her sponsor." The mother from the market stood. "My son. I'll sponsor her. A miner. I'll sign. A cart driver. Same." The Pelham sisters stood together. The only time in recorded history they'd agreed simultaneously. One by one, the people rose from their seats and their soup bowls, and they stood in front of the guards with the stubborn, slightly confused determination of people who had just discovered a line they were not willing to watch someone cross. Not a revolution, just tired people choosing to be more than their worst instincts. The elder guard looked at the growing pile of names Elias was writing on a flour receipt. He sighed. "This will need to be filed with the garrison clerk." "File it," Elias replied without looking up. The guards left with 14 signatures and the impression that returning would be more trouble than Lord Heron's schedule was worth. "Why?" Gorka said, holding the medal. Voss rubbed his beard. "Wouldn't look at her. Your mother helped people during the war, an orc medic who treated human wounded even when her command ordered otherwise." He stared at the floor. "Least somebody can do is make sure her daughter doesn't freeze behind a barricade." Gorka pressed her right fist against her chest. Once, hard, over her heart. The orc salute. The deepest one. Reserved for debts that could never be spoken. Nobody knew what the gesture meant, but they felt it. The way you feel thunder before you hear it. Voss, slowly, awkwardly, with the wrong hand, pressed his own fist against his chest. Then, at his face, she laughed. Not the cautious, almost smiles. A real laugh. Sudden, raw, slightly too loud, with a rumble that rattled the bread racks. The sound of something cracking open that had been sealed for longer than she could remember. "Wrong hand," she said, and her voice cracked on the second word. "Which hand is right?" "The left. And you hit harder, like you mean it." Voss switched hands, hit his chest hard enough to cough. Gorka laughed again, wet this time, sliding toward something else. Entirely. A child at one of the tables raised his small fist and slammed it against his own chest hard enough to nearly knock himself off the chair. The entire bakery laughed. Even the miners, even the Pelham sisters, even Gorka, who stood with her back turned and her mother's medal against her heart. And tears she would deny until the day she died. The story continues. If you want to be here when the walls come down and the bread rises, hit subscribe. Members walk this road first, and if this chapter earned it, a super thanks is kindness made visible. 3 weeks passed, and the bakery stopped being a place where Gorka was hiding. It became instead a place where she lived. The change happened the way most real changes happen, not through declaration, but through accumulation. The particular way she arranged the morning loaves on the cooling rack, tallest at the back, darkest crust facing the window, where light would catch the caramelization. The handwritten inventory lists tacked above the flour bins, each entry precise, the letters formed in the stiff, angular hand of someone who'd learned to write in a language built for carved stone. The smell of the bakery itself, which had shifted over the weeks from Elias's familiar rye and rosemary to something deeper. the dark spices she ground into certain batches, the faint resin of the orc-healing salve she kept under the prep table for burns. Her loaves were different, denser, darker, built for endurance rather than pleasure, the way orc food was always built. Not to delight the mouth, but to sustain the body through conditions that would break it. The first customer to order one by name, the dark one, the orc bread, made Gorka freeze behind the partition for 3 full seconds before setting it on the counter. Millhaven adjusted, not universally. 2 families stopped coming entirely, but other things happened. A miner's wife left wool socks on the counter with a note saying, "For the cold," and no name attached. The schoolteacher asked whether Gorka might speak to his students about field medicine, and the children, always the children first, stopped crossing the street when they saw her and started pressing their faces against the glass to watch bread being made. Voss came every day now, ate his soup, drank his coffee, and grunted in Gorka's direction in a way that might have constituted a greeting. She grunted back. By orc standards, a meaningful friendship. The orc merchant appeared on a Tuesday morning. 3 wagons pulled by massive gray oxen, loaded with cured hides, bone tools, and the pungent dried meats that human noses found challenging. The lead driver was enormous, even by orc standards, with iron rings braided into a chest-length beard and the permanently suspicious expression of someone who made his living moving goods through territories that didn't want him. He pulled the lead wagon to a stop in front of the bakery, stared at Gorka, who had come to the doorway with flour on her forearms and an apron that said, "Thorns," across the front. He stared at the apron for a very long time. Then he spoke in Orcish, a rapid sequence of guttural syllables, the tone carrying incredulity bordering on offense. Gorka answered briefly. He spoke again. Longer, Elias caught one word, grak, which she'd once translated as something between shame and waste. Gorka squared her shoulders and answered in common. "You asked if I am ashamed. I am not. For the first time since the war, I am not." The merchant studied her. His eyes moved from the apron to her flour-dusted hands, and something shifted in his expression. Not acceptance. The acknowledgement that whatever he was looking at, it was real. He grunted. "Your bread. It is orc bread? Some of it. I will try." She brought him the dark loaf, the one with the crosshatch pattern scored into the crust, a traditional orc blessing meaning nourishment for the journey. He tore it with his hands, chewed slowly. "It is not terrible," he said. "High praise," Elias muttered from behind the counter. The merchant bought 4 loaves, paid in border trade silver, real weight worth more than Millhaven copper. He loaded them, looked at Gorka one more time, and spoke a single word in Orcish. Gorka flinched, then straightened, then nodded. The caravan rolled on. "What did he say?" Elias asked. "Hroksha. It means still standing. What orcs say to survivors, people who should have fallen but did not. Is that a compliment? The closest thing we have to one." The next batch she shaped carried the crosshatch blessing on every loaf, not just the orc ones. 2 days later, the bakery got a new sign. Gorka took the old one down before dawn, sanded it smooth, and repainted it with charcoal, iron oxide, and reddish clay from the riverbank. Thorn and Gorkas. Beneath the letters, 2 symbols. On the left, the human baker's wheat sheaf. On the right, the orc healer's spiral, the same symbol etched into her mother's metal. Different traditions, different alphabets, same piece of wood. Elias stood in the street staring at it while dawnlight caught the wet paint. "You put your name on my bakery," he said. "You put your bread in my life. I thought we were trading." He looked at the sign, at the 2 symbols side by side. "The ampersand is crooked," he said. "Everything in this bakery is crooked. It is consistent." He snorted, rubbed his bad knee, went inside. The sign stayed. That evening, Gorka took her mother's medal from the register, drove a nail into the lintel above the front door, and hung it from the leather cord. Then she looked at Elias. "Do you still have yours?" He walked to the back of the kitchen, to the shelf above the oven where he kept things he didn't look at often. Behind a jar of dried herbs and a broken clock. A small leather pouch, inside, tarnished and scratched, a human military service medallion. bronze, stamped with the seal of the 4th Expeditionary Company, awarded for surviving Kesser Ridge. He hung it beside hers on a second nail. 2 symbols, 2 wars, 2 sides that had spent a decade trying to destroy each other, reduced to 2 pieces of metal hanging side by side above the door of a bakery that smelled like bread and survival. They look good together, Gorka said. They look like a terrible idea. Someone's going to steal them. Let them try. He almost smiled. She almost smiled. The almost was enough. Winter deepened in slow gray increments. Frost every morning. The river froze. Firewood prices doubled. The bakery held, not because its walls were stronger, the oven still cracked along the left flue, but something inside had shifted. The air felt warmer even when the fire burned low, more inhabited, the kind of warmth that comes not from combustion but from the accumulated evidence that a space is being used for something worth doing. Customers lingered longer, talked more quietly, sometimes laughed, not the performative kind, but the real kind, surprised and involuntary. Gorka offered orc bread alongside Elias's standard loaves. The dark rounds sat next to the lighter rye and wheat like diplomatic envoys. Unfamiliar, slightly intimidating, increasingly present. The school teacher was the first to order one, approaching with scientific solemnity and asking for one of the other ones. He came back the next day for 2. By winter's 3rd week, orc bread accounted for a quarter of daily sales. Not because it was better by human standards. It was heavier, aggressively seasoned with spices that made taste buds question their life choices. But because difference, in a town that had been eating the same bread for 14 years, turned out to be something people were hungrier for than they knew. "You are outselling me in my own bakery," Elias said one evening. "Your bread is too soft. My bread is perfect. Your bread is what humans think bread should be. My bread is what bread actually is. That is the most orc thing you have ever said. Thank you." It wasn't a compliment. I know. Teaching each other happened without being planned. Through proximity and the slow erosion of the assumption that your way was the only way. It started with the spices. Gorka used a blend called vrak, dried root bark, crushed mineral salt, and something that smelled like smoke and tasted like the memory of a campfire in a language you'd never spoken. She measured by instinct, adding it to dough with the confidence of someone following instructions in her bloodstream, rather than a recipe. Elias asked what was in it. "Things you cannot pronounce. Try me," she told him. He couldn't pronounce any of it. She taught him anyway, grinding the components with a stone pestle, mixing ratios by smell, working it into the dough at the precise moment when the gluten could absorb the oils without collapsing. His first orc loaf was terrible, dense as a brick, burnt on one side, raw on the other. "Ambitious," Gorka said after a long silence. "Ambitious is not a food word. In Orcish it means the spirit was willing, but the hands were confused. Does it really? No, but it should. By the 7th attempt, she grudgingly admitted it was not an insult to the ingredients. In return, Elias taught her pastry. This was a disaster. Orc hands were built for warhammers and field surgery, not for folding butter into laminated dough. Her first croissant looked like a bread roll that had been in a fight and lost. Her second was worse. By the 3rd, flour covered every surface, including the ceiling. "This is a stupid food," Gorka announced. "It's a croissant. It is an engineering failure. It's supposed to be flaky. Flaky is a structural weakness." She looked at him. He looked at her, flour on the ceiling, butter on the walls, 2 failed croissants sitting on the counter like evidence of a crime. She laughed. He laughed. The sounds met in the middle of the kitchen and became something neither had heard in a very long time. 2 people being ridiculous together in a room where ridiculous was allowed. Later that night, they sat at the counter with soup and the day's last bread. The medals hung above the door, bone and bronze catching firelight. "My mother used to say something," Gorka said. Elias waited. He'd learned to wait with her. The pauses weren't hesitation but architecture. The process of building a sentence strong enough to carry what needed to be said. She said, "A blade kills 1,000 enemies. A loaf of bread makes 1,000 enemies into friends." She looked at her flour-covered hands. At the kitchen. I never understood her. I thought she was being weak. I thought a warrior who refused to kill was not a warrior. She paused. I was wrong. It'll ruin my reputation. Your reputation is that of a stubborn man with a crooked bakery and terrible organizational skills. Exactly. I've worked hard on that. The fire settled. Wind pressed against shutters. Beyond the mountains, in camps where the war's aftermath was still being measured in bodies and absences, the world continued deciding what to do with its damage. But here, in this room, at this counter, between these two people, something smaller and more important was happening. Not healing exactly. Nothing heals completely. The scars remain. The nightmares remain. The empty places where loved ones stood remain. But the spaces between the scars can be filled, not with forgetting, but with bread, with work, with the daily act of choosing to be in a room with another person and letting that be enough. Morning came the way it always did. Gray, cold, reluctant. Frost on the windows, smoke rising from chimneys like the town exhaling. Elias was arranging loaves, human and orc side by side, the way nobody remarked on anymore. When the door opened, a child on the threshold. Small copper hair, missing a front tooth. The same boy who had screamed. He stood with his mother's hand on his shoulder, looking into the bakery with the particular intensity of a child working through something adults had failed to explain. His eyes found Gorka immediately. She was behind the prep table, hands in dough, and she went still. Neither moved. Then the boy walked across the floor, small boots on stone tiles, each step deliberate, and stood in front of the prep table looking up. "Why are your teeth like that?" he asked. The bakery held its breath. Gorka looked down at him, at the copper hair, the missing tooth, the absolute fearless curiosity of someone too young to know some questions were supposed to be dangerous. "I ate too much bread," she said. His eyes went wide. He looked at the bread, looked at her tusks, looked at the bread. "Will my teeth do that? Only if you eat the dark bread. The light bread is safe." He considered this with the gravity of a major life decision. Then he looked at his mother, who stood near the door with one hand over her mouth and tears running down her cheeks. "I want to try the dark bread," he said. Gorka tore a piece from the nearest orc loaf and handed it down. He bit into it, chewed, surprise, confusion. Something that might have been offense, and then the dawning recognition that this unfamiliar thing was actually good. "It's crunchy," he said. "Yes, I like crunchy. Then you have good taste." He grinned, wide, unguarded, gap-toothed, and went back to his mother with bread in his hand and crumbs on his chin. The door closed. The bell rang once. Elias looked at Gorka across the room. She was standing with her hands in dough and an expression he had never seen and understood immediately. Joy, the terrified, disbelieving, barely held together joy of someone who had just been accepted by a child and knew the way bone-deep knowledge works, that children do not lie about the things that matter. He turned back to the loaves, adjusted one that didn't need adjusting. "You're going to make that kid's teeth fall out," he said. They were already falling out. Fair point. The morning continued. Customers arrived. Orders were filled. The bakery hummed with the quiet mechanics of a place that had found its rhythm. Bread rising, oven ticking. Two people moving through shared space with the coordination of a partnership neither had planned, and neither would trade. Outside, the first snow began to fall on Nilhaven. Light flakes, barely visible, drifting through still air. They settled on cobblestones on rooftops, on the sign above the bakery door where two names and two symbols sat side by side, in paint already beginning to weather. Inside, the oven burned. Bread cooled on the rack, dark and light, dense and soft, orc and human, arranged together without hierarchy or apology. The metals hung above the door, bone and bronze, tooth and stamp. Two pieces of evidence that the war hadn't destroyed everything, that somewhere between the damage and the grief and the hard work of surviving, something worth keeping had taken root in a kitchen that smelled like flour and fire. Gorka shaped dough at the prep table. Elias stoked the oven. Snow fell, the town woke, and the bread, all of it, Every kind, every imperfect loaf shaped by scarred hands in a warm room, went out into the world the way bread always does. Quietly, without asking permission, without waiting to be told it belonged. This is where the story lives, not in algorithms or trends, but in the quiet space between two strangers who chose to sit down together. If you made it here, you are part of that. Subscribe to Walk the Road Ahead. Join the membership to keep the oven lit. And if this story found you at the right moment, the way bread finds the hungry and warmth finds the cold, a super thanks is the simplest way to say, I was here. I felt it. Keep going.